Okay, so how does manual soil coring work? So the most tried and true method of measuring carbon in soil involves taking a physical soil sample. There's many ways to do that. Have a few examples of manual probes here that we can use. This kind of a probe is useful for taking shallow samples to about 30 centimeters or so, which is a common depth that's now sampled for purposes of carbon inventories. If we want to take deeper samples, we can use what's called a bucket auger. That's one way of getting a slightly deeper sample. They each have their pros and cons. And finally, in order to calculate the mass, the total mass of soil carbon in a field, essentially we need to know two different things. We need to know the concentration of carbon in a soil sample on a mass basis. And then we need to know something that's called the bulk density, which is the mass of soil per unit volume. And so we really need those two measurements to get an estimate of the total mass of carbon in an agricultural field. And it actually turns out that bulk density can be surprisingly time-consuming to measure. And to measure bulk density, we traditionally use slightly larger cores, such as this one here. And actually, the best bulk density measurements, people will argue about the best way to do it, but sometimes that actually involves digging a pit or in the ground and actually using those soil pits to collect larger samples for bulk density. So essentially, this all depends on your soil conditions. If your soil is not too wet or not too dry, you can get by with just inserting the soil probe manually into the ground. Sometimes you can help it along with a hammer, such as this dead blow hammer here. One nice thing about the bucket auger is that you can use actually these cutting blades to help you auger the sampler into the soil, so that gives you a little bit of help. There's a number of different kinds of other different kinds of samplers that I haven't brought along today, but these are a couple of the ones that we use. Perhaps the best way to sample soils for carbon measurement is actually to use a truck-mounted pneumatic sampler. Unfortunately, we didn't have access to that today, and many folks won't necessarily have access to that kind of equipment. But that's sort of the Cadillac version of the soil sampler. So what do we do now? So ideally, right, if we're going to measure carbon in this field, we want to take a number of samples to capture the spatial variability in soil carbon. Soil carbon is tremendously variable over space, and so by taking a number of individual samples and then pooling together, we could begin to average out that variabilities, right? So we're combining a number of individual samples, mixing them really well. Then the next step is to bring these back to the laboratory, let them dry out, sieve them, and grind them. And then from that point on, we can go ahead with our chemical analyses to actually determine the mass of carbon in the sample.